In a few minutes, Jonny Dyer from All Souls Langham Place in London, UK, is going to speak to us. His reading is taken from 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 to 23. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, "I will set up my camp in such and such a place." The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there." So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king, so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" "None of us, my lord, the king," said one of his officers. "But Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom." "Go, find out where he is," the king ordered, "so I can send men and capture him." The report came back, "He is in Dothan." Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down towards him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were, inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill those you had captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them, so that they may eat and drink, and then go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Listen on for part 1 of Jonny's talk, Seeing the Unseen.
Well, hi, and greetings from London. I'm so sorry not to get the chance to meet you this week, but I'm pleased to be able to bring you a few thoughts from the Bible. On one school trip, we visited a cave in Ingleborough, North Yorkshire, and to a 9-year-old, a mountain cave was an exciting experience. The most memorable part of the tour, however, was not the beautiful rock formations. Deep inside the cave, the tour leader turned out all the lights to show how dark the cave could be. I'll be honest with you, I was uneasy enough within myself with the dark, but it didn't help any to hear a loud gasp and then the sustained sobbing of a girl's voice close by in the dark. When the lights came back on, a frightened and embarrassed Emma Tipton, who I should add was the prettiest girl in the class, was tightly gripping my arm with both her hands. Now, I obviously remember that trip because it's the nearest I ever came to Emma. But I remember it just as well for that scary sensation of having your eyes wide open and yet not being able to see even a faint glimmer of light. It's stayed with me, and it reminded me, it's been a graphic illustration of the biblical judgment we find in places like Jeremiah chapter 5 verse 21. They have eyes, but they do not see. Now, the Bible will often use physical sight as a metaphor for understanding and discernment, so the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida is as much a metaphor for gaining spiritual insight. And our passage here in 2 Kings chapter 6 is all about seeing. It's about being blind and gaining sight. The invading foreign king whose plans are thwarted because someone keeps seeing his plans and tipping off the king of Israel. The servant whose eyes are open to see the armies of the Lord. The armies of the enemy whose eyes are open to see the compassion of God. It's a passage that reminds us that God sees everything and that God also shows his love and mercy to us through opening our eyes to see his forgiveness and grace. It's a reminder that we were once blind and needed to receive this gift of sight. And even now, with this gift of sight, we daily need the eyes of our hearts opened, just like the servant of Elisha. You see, our passage is a call to see God at work in this world, to pray that God would open the eyes of our friends and family, the kids we work with on camp, that they would come to see the mercy of God. But it's more than that. Every year we put on camps from the Track in Nagaland to Nethy Bridge in Scotland, from the Tops in Sydney to Tatura Springs in New Zealand, from the Hope Centre in Brazil to the Sikh Centre in Kenya. And yes, every year they are well planned. Yes, every year the kids go away saying, that was the best week of my life. And yes, many of the kids come to know Jesus as their Lord and Saviour, but we're kidding ourselves if we think, aren't we doing a great job? It's bound to be a great week. The battle is won. We're kidding ourselves if we think that the evil one is going to lie low in ways that we're yet to imagine, and in ways that it's easy to imagine. He will seek to disrupt. He's certainly using COVID-19. Many of us are sat at home. We're already having cancelled our camps. Others of us sitting there thinking, are we going to have to cancel them? Satan is doing his very best this year to ruin camp. It's why it's helpful to remind ourselves that we do not go into these coming weeks and months alone, that the one who is for us is far more powerful than the one who is against us. And God is still at work in our ministries, even when we can't immediately see how. So let's have a look at this passage together, and let's notice straight away that we should expect opposition when we're doing the Lord's work. See, our problem is that too often we're caught out, we're surprised by it. We're guilty of not seeing the opposition. Let's have a look at verse 8. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel, and after conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again Elisha warned the king, so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers, but Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go, find out where he is, the king of Israel ordered, so that I can send men and capture him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Now, two important details emerge in these verses. We know Elisha is a prophet, and as such, he's the mouthpiece of God, regularly rebuking wayward Israelite leaders and calling the people back to uphold the covenant, calling them to live lives of holiness. We also know that he's a man filled with compassion, especially for unbelievers. Just think of the way he heals Naaman from leprosy back there in chapter 5. You remember he says to the commander of the army of the king of Aram, go wash in the river Jordan 7 times, wash and be cleansed. And Naaman's healed. From his leprosy, he receives God's grace. He comes to know and worship the God of Israel. Elisha is obviously unique. He's an Old Testament prophet, and there's not many of them. But in many ways, Elisha is like many of us, or many of us are like him. Our eyes have been opened to the works of God in this world. We are the mouthpiece of God in our workplace, on our front lines, on camp. We're seeking to live godly lives, longing to see unbelievers healed. So what then do we notice about Elisha in this narrative? Well, the first important detail that emerges here is that we see that Elisha's actions put him in personal danger. Look there at verse 13. Go, find out where he is, the king ordered, so that I can send men and capture him. The reality is that anyone who is active and involved in God's work will split a room, will stir up opposition, will cause people to turn against them. Now, you'll rarely find the clergy here at All Souls Langham Place wearing their clerical collars. But a while back I was returning from a funeral and I had my collar on and actually forgotten I was wearing it until I got on the London Underground train, sat down, and the lady next to me got up and moved. On one level, that's a silly illustration of opposition, but on another level it serves to illustrate that as Christians we will split a room. And you'll almost certainly have experienced this yourself at the school gate, when you're speaking to a neighbour. Someone says to you, "What did you do yesterday?" "Well, I went to church in the morning." "Oh, really?" As you can see, the person reworking their opinion of you. It can even lead to outright opposition. A friend of mine was seeking to set up a Christian union in work, and he found himself labelled as a troublemaker by his bosses. We are to expect opposition in our gospel work, and let's not be naive here. A second point that emerges from these verses is more subtle but just as important. The king of Aramea, or modern-day Syria, is in his war rooms in a bunker in a palace in Damascus, and he's building a military strategy with his senior advisors. He's moving models of chariots and horsemen and foot soldiers around a great map of Israel. And then he's sending out coded orders to his officers in the field to make camp in such and such a place. But back in Israel, Elisha, the man of God, is also taking strategy to his commander-in-chief. The Arameans are there and there, now there, verse 10. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. The Lord is giving Elisha this information to show the king, to show the people, that the Lord is all-powerful. He's all-knowing, that he's in control. Let's not forget that at this time of this pandemic. Let's be wise and let's be careful, but let's not lose sight of the fact that our God is in control. Coronavirus has not come as a surprise to our God. The king of Syria had made plans that Elisha continually foiled, and he's pulling his hair out. Outfoxed every time, he demands to know who is the spy in his senior ranks leaking top-secret intelligence. Outfoxed every time. That reminds me of the way the British cracked the Enigma code during the Second World War. They were then able to predict Nazi troop movements and offences, and it gave the Allies a real edge, particularly on the Russian front. And they said the decoding was so successful, it was as if the British were sitting in Himmler's bunker listening to him discuss his plans. Now the king's advisors somehow know about Elisha, verse 12. The advisor, of course, may have been Naaman, the passage doesn't say. Anyway, the advisors do say, verse 12, Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. You do feel sorry, don't you, for his wife, sitting up in bed, listening to her husband, discussing troop movements, increasingly frustrated that his plans are being frustrated. The king, you see there, is so frustrated that he boldly orders, verse 13, to go and capture the prophet. The irony of this order reveals something here about the king. His officers had told him that Elisha could learn about his most secret plans, and yet he made a move against the prophet as if he could somehow sneak up and carry Elisha away before he knew it. It tells us that the king here is not a very wise man. He did not really understand with whom he was dealing. It was not only Elisha that his armies would confront. There will be opposition any time we truly respond to God and serve him. And that is the point of the New Testament sayings about taking up our cross and following Jesus. And Jesus does not promise an easy life. Yet in the face of conflict or persecution, we can remain steadfast, assured that any opposition does not really understand. You see, when it comes down to it, they're not opposing us. They are opposing God, and God can handle it. Let's be sure we're seeing the opposition for what it is, futile, for no one can stand against our God. But this is not the whole story. You see, the reality is that we are in a spiritual battle. Every time we run a camp, we are waging war at a spiritual level. And it's easy, isn't it, to feel overwhelmed, dispirited, and feel as if we are on our own, particularly as leaders. We may feel like this today. And just like the servant of Elisha, we need to see the unseen. We need to have our eyes open and see that the one who is for us is greater than the one who is against us. And it's that we're going to think about